Hello friends, welcome to episode 154 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
We are sitting in front of each other and healthy.
Yes.
We're gonna accept that right now.
Yeah, it was weird last week going remote.
What's really funny is, a year ago.
Yeah.
We did it. I don't think it was exactly a year ago, but it was pretty close on.
So it's just an annual remote show is what?
Yeah. We have our annual recorded shows. Yeah. We have our annual remote shows. Yeah. Maybe we'll do that like in memorandum of like in memory of those we lost during COVID. We'll do one remote show, you know. It hurts, but at the same time kind of reminds us, I guess, you know. Yeah. I mean, it might be a neat thing to do or to think about.
Yeah.
We have a lot to discuss in this system spotlight, but I do have something I'd like to bring up.
Okay.
So some of you in our Discord may have noticed that we had a new member, Dice Legends, who is unfortunately still working on some issues with Discord, but they're doing very well. They are a professional D&D show in New Zealand. So they're like the Critical Role in New Zealand. And they're a television crew with stage professionals and actors, and ran by a producer, actor, voice actor. He's pretty prolific and huge D&D nerd. And that's Vahid, who is been doing this. And like we kind of went back and forth and discussed it. So this isn't necessarily like show promo or anything like that, but we were like, hey, you know, community to community.
That's relevant.
Let's talk about this. And I know we've got some listeners in New Zealand, so hello to those in New Zealand. Watch this show. So apparently their show is a homebrew system, Arati, which is like a walled city, that is, it's a low magic setting where the wizards are registered. So much that they have to be officially trained and have a tattoo. Otherwise, they're basically like sorcerers and warlocks who are illegal.
Oh, I like that.
It's kind of I like that. I've always kind of liked that concept, and it's a neat system for that. And all of the players are playing the town guard.
Okay.
So there's four of them. There's there's Acapella, who is a dwarf bard, played by Raylene. There is Lona, which is a human wizard, who is played by Ronnie Talafo, I think I'm saying that right.
Talafo, yeah.
Yeah. Sully, who is a human fighter, who is played by Truby Dylan Smith, I think is the way that, or Dylan Smith. And then Nemrot, there's a T at the beginning of it, I always have to do this, Nemrot, is a tiefling cleric, played by Monique Clemenston. And they play at 8 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. So on Saturday evenings.
Okay.
So
I was gonna say, is that a Wednesday thing? Like, are they competing with us?
No, they aren't. And so it's just funny the way that their timing works out. For hitting the times right. Cause I think right now, if they're listening right now, they're listening at like 11 o'clock. To listen to us live.
Oh, 11. Yeah. I saw their tweet when I was 11 a.m.
We wish you guys great success on your next show. And
good morning to everybody in New Zealand. Hello.
Good morning to all of you down there. And we're happy to have you, join the conclave and talk through your stories and adventures and help make the community more of a community. So
hopefully some of our advice helps make some shining moments in your show too.
Yeah, so. and or your next adventure could be a totally different system.
True.
Because D&D is not the only system out there, and we're proving it every time we run this.
Speaking of different systems.
So I'm going to ask you this before we even get into this.
Oh, go ahead, ask me.
When I said we were going to do Lord of the Rings, the One Ring RPG 2nd edition, what was your first thoughts about it?
So I've got a complicated relationship with Lord of the Rings. It's kind of that, like, almost elitist in not knowing it sort of thing. Like, all the other nerds know Lord of the Rings. I don't. Haha. That's my badge of honor. I don't know Lord of the Rings.
You've seen the movies.
Well, I've seen the movies, but it's kind of the same. I have the same relationship with Lord of the Rings that I did with Star Wars, where it's like, I watched the movies, I enjoyed it, I tried reading the book once, I made it to, where they made it to Bree.
Okay.
And they first meet Strider. Like,
sure.
I got that far in the book and I was like, this is so dense.
Well, I mean, you got past Tom Bombadil, so I'll give you that.
No, I didn't.
Oh, that's right, you didn't.
No, I didn't.
I'm sorry.
I was like in the first 10 chapters of the book. Like
Okay,
I could just not do it.
That's fair. That's fair.
And so I gave it an earnest try. Maybe I was in the wrong headspace of the book. Maybe I'll try it again with like an audiobook or something like that. But,
honestly, they're really good. There's some of the audiobooks are really good.
So,
but regardless, so like now the RPG gets set in front of you, sight unseen.
I'm like, okay. I mean, I feel the same way about it that I do Star Wars. Like, I appreciate it for culturally what impact it's had, but as far as the source material goes, okay.
Yeah. So now we've completed with
that we've set the stage.
We've set the stage. What is your feeling about this as on the whole? Let's say that. Is it like preparation age?
It feels pretty good on the whole. Yeah. I don't know that I would jump straight to going, I'm in love with the system. That might be a little overstated.
We haven't played
it. So
but mechanically and looking at the system as we have in this, I would say we've done a solid 3-day deep dive on this.
Yeah. I went out and bought the hardcover book from our FLGS,
You did.
RW Hobbits.
After I had already bought the digital book for the show.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful book. We'll talk about it later because we do highlights at the end.
Yes.
I'll talk about the book, but I went out and bought a hard copy because I find it a lot easier to read an actual book than I do like a PDF copy.
Totally understandable.
It's just like, you know what, it's good. I'm liking the system so far. I'll pick it up. My overall impression is that this does D&D better than D&D does D&D.
And I love that statement. There's some stuff that will justify that we'll get through and into this and why I feel very similarly about it.
In this thesis, I will.
Yeah, in this show, we will show you that we're not going to do a comparison directly, but I agree with the statement, and I think the core of that is that what we believe D&D is played like, how it is exposed to us, how we think it should.
I say how it presents itself.
Yeah.
How it presents itself is not necessarily what you get out of that package.
Right. And we kind of agreed there's going to be a whole show that's going to come out of the discussion that happened after we were done reviewing this ourselves.
Yeah. But I think, whereas Dungeons and Dragons posits itself as this, like, they'll live the life of an adventurer, go out on long countryside journeys, facing perils, sitting around the campfire with your comrades, and delving into dungeons and facing evils, and then returning home victorious with your riches to, reflect on your experiences and grow and learn as an adventurer, just to take off and do it all again the next day. What you get instead is a tactical combat simulator, whereas the One Ring RPG delivers on every single bullet point of that.
Yep. So let's kind of get into some history then.
Yeah.
So it didn't start out where it did. It actually started out in 2011 with the One Ring Adventures Over the Edge of the Wild, and that was done by Cubicle 7. Now they're both canonically still in the same place. They still sit between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, timeline wise. And
there's like a 20-year period there, I think.
Yeah, which is, by role-playing standards,
that's forever.
Well, hold on. By role-playing standards, that's a really small timeline. 20 years seems tiny. Because when we talk about Forgotten Realms, or we talk about Eberron, or we talk about any of these other giant, there's thousands of years that you could fall into different places along them.
Yeah, I've got definitely thousands of years in Tamriel as well. Yeah.
Think of like Star Wars. There's Old Republic, New Republic, Clone Wars, all the movies, and there's more than 20-year gaps in those movies in some cases.
True.
So I shouldn't say all the movies, but in some of them, clearly. So to say that this fits this nice little 20-year niche, this little spot right here, and you're like, what are you going to do in those 20 years?
That's threading the needle.
Yeah, well, it's closer to what 7C does.
Yeah.
Like, this is, literally 7C says, here's the year, enjoy yourself. Events are going to happen. So they had it in 2011. In 2019, they ceased publishing in November, and that license was then picked up by Free League Publishing. Now, they picked up the entire license, and that'll come into play later, but in 2020, and then in 2021, they kickstarted this book, the One Ring 2nd edition, as a follow-up, using the original game creators, the original two parties in it, and I'm going to butcher names if I even say them, but
sure.
But to continue it on and make it better. Literally make it a second edition, not a, hey, we're redoing the whole thing and calling it second edition with different people. These are literally just, what did we learn from the first step? And it was funded in 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Which is not the fastest.
Yeah.
There are ones that have gotten it, they're fighting for that number of seconds that funds their crap.
Speed run, yeah.
And it was released, the commercial retail release just hit March 21st, 2022 is when it went to the store. So you couldn't even have gotten a hardcover until last month.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, which is why I was really interested in jumping in on it. I didn't get in on the Kickstarter. I remember seeing it. I remember hearing some good things about it, but I was like, I'm on too many other Kickstarters. I'm not going to jump on this one. The original editions, there were additional books, some errata that went with it that included 6 adventures and 7 cultural supplements and actually a card game that they threw in there as well for good measure. That was the Hobbit Tales from the Green Dragon Inn card game. So it was just a section thing. But all of those added some additional classes, or effectively classes, cultures, and adventuring regions, maps, things like that. And kind of expanded the area. Funny enough, you can go back and grab those and actually incorporate those because there was only certain rules removed.
Okay.
So everything kind of still works.
Yeah.
Which is nice. That's a nice addition. Like, being able to use some of the old D&D books, like the Ranger's Handbook, would be amazing. Ain't no way that's gonna work.
Oh, yeah. No,
so,
it's a completely different version.
But for the second edition, you have the core rule book, the Quick Start Adventure Guide, and a Lore Master screen that compiles all the rules into, I think it's a 3-screen roll.
They usually are.
It's either 3 or 4. You can't really see it that well on the Drive-Thru RPG, and I was trying to see if there was a better shot of it, but I couldn't. But realistically, in all the rules and mechanics that we're talking about and that we'll be going over today, it fits. And it's not small print.
Yeah,
so,
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Once you learn like the core mechanics of the game, it's a lot of stuff really just kind of tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it had 9 awards in those years. For the first edition.
So they're cleaned up in 2012. We've got a Golden Geek, Best Art and Presentation, Gold Any, at, Best Free Product. Another Gold Any, Best Art, Interior, Best Production Values, Best of Show for Best Role-Playing Game, Origins Award nominee for Best Role-Playing Game. Wow, yeah. No,
and then they just made it better. So, we're still to see great awards to come out of this book that's sitting next to us, which I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it for a second edition. I don't know if you can get that for second editions when it's just a slight rules change, but I believe this is award winning again. I really do. And we'll get into why at the end, my thoughts on it at least. And I will softly say there is a 5th edition of this, where you can run technically Adventures in Middle-earth in 5th edition that was published by Cubicle 7 back in 2016. Free League owns that. There is no current chart for them to re-update that one as well. And in all honesty, if I had my druthers, I would tell them don't do it.
Yeah.
Just don't.
Yeah.
So, there's your bit of history.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about what this world represents and why it's kind of everything that we already do.
So,
as far as fantasy is concerned.
I'm going to be dead honest with you. I saw that you wrote the stuff down on the show sheet, and I didn't read it.
Okay.
I didn't even read the like storyteller section, the lore master section.
You went right to mechanics.
I learned the mechanics of the game, and I learned how to play it and stuff like that. And through the mechanics, I could just feel like my brain was just going like, oh, this is just like that part in the movies, where they like it expresses itself remarkably to the point where I still, as I said this before coming into the show, in a previous show, like I don't know the lore all that well of Lord of the Rings. I've seen the movies, I appreciate the movies, but that's it. That's all I've got going into this.
Yeah.
And I still don't know the lore. I didn't read any of the lore in the book, and I still feel super comfortable walking into this game.
Yeah.
Pretty much blind.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that they try to express at the beginning is that it is built for both those who have a deep love for Lord of the Rings and those who have an interest in fantasy and want to feel Lord of the Rings and know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is hobbits and dwarves and elves in the lone lands of Eriador. Like, that right there is everything. This is a specific time in history where you can talk about the lands and where things were and how they became, and sell it as a simple sales pitch. But the truth of the matter is something that they put in very black and white in the book very early on, and that is they invite players to leave the age of information and fast travel and adopt the view of individuals whose horizons often didn't extend farther than a few miles from their birthplace. That is a powerful quote to put in a book to remind the players to forget about the lore, to focus on the culture and understanding of that player and of that player character, and literally to be, for some of you who are familiar with the war, like Samwise Gamgee, a simple person who never crossed the boundaries of their own village or town, or to be like Gimli, son of Glóin, who ignored the existence of Rohan until he visited. He just ignored that it didn't exist. Right? Or even Éowyn, who was a noble and never had encountered an elf or a hobbit before the War of the Ring. She lived in Rohan. She was a noble and was well studied, and yet had never seen those races before. But at the same time, everyone has got these stories, this folklore, that there are these distant realms where folks inhabit. And that place is different than home. And that's the feeling. That is the truth and the feel of the system. That's it. Like, I'm not even going to get into the heaviness of Lord of the Rings, because you don't need to. All you need to understand is that this is your character in this world, and you're brought together with other unique individuals who, some of races and places you've never been before.
Yeah.
But it calls to you to go do something.
To me, there were, and these are both serious cliches.
Sure.
But I think this game really, pulls them out of cliche and puts them directly into praxis in front of you. And that is, one, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
100%.
And two, the real treasure is the friends you make along the way.
No, that's solid.
Legitimately, there are rules for crafting your fellowship and your essentially your friendship and your bond to other people in the group and working together as a team to support one another. It really is a game that encourages that and builds that right into the core of its gameplay loop. Yeah,
not even so much as Dungeon World has bonds that kind of help you.
Those are more role-playing prompts than anything else.
This is actual mechanics.
These
are mechanics.
Rob is my fellowship focus. I get bonuses to help him, you know?
Yeah.
And if anything bad happens to Rob, I take shadow points because, oh God, Rob, no, you know?
Yeah. And that's the truth. That's literally how this game is designed, and it's beautiful in that sense. It is a gorgeous wrapping of the things that we want D&D to be.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about this love. We're not going into the lore. We don't need to.
Yeah.
We're going to just talk about what makes it different.
You want lore, watch the movies, read the book.
Yeah.
It's all there.
So, number one, are there classes in this?
Not really.
There are job titles. I mean, effectively.
I think they're called callings.
Yeah, we'll get to those. But realistically, you start with a culture.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. Imagine if D&D started out with, you're an orc from the Highlands. That's what you are.
Yeah.
Wait, what do you mean? That's it. You're an orc from the Highlands. Have a nice day.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, go.
That should tell you enough about your character. Go,
yeah. Oh, what kind of an orc from the Highlands are you? Here are a bunch of attribute choices you can make. You get 6 options. So instead of it being a spread where everyone has the same spread, every one of these cultures, whether you're a barding, dwarves of Durinfolk, elves of Lindon, hobbits of the Shire, men of Bree, or rangers of the North, you have your own 6 spread of attributes.
Well, okay, hold on. Let me clarify what you mean there.
Right.
I think you're seeing it in your head and you're saying it, but I don't think it's coming across.
Right.
So character creation is very, very quick. There are 3 attributes.
That's it.
Strength, heart, and wits. There are 6 arrays of numbers. You can either roll a d6 and take the line of attributes that corresponds to that, or you can choose the one that you want.
And each culture has their own set of array.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're going to find that like dwarves have a very high strength. Like it's going to be between like 5 and 7.
Right.
You know, whereas your hobbits have a very high heart. Theirs are going to be 5 to 7, but like their strengths are going to be between like 2 and 4.
Right.
You know.
And what's interesting is those attributes have are also target numbers. They create a derived number out of them.
It's always 20 minus your attribute score.
Right.
So you always know right in front of you, very much like Savage Worlds, you always know what your target number is. You never need to wonder, is the DM making this harder or less hard, or should I do it this way? You know, it's like, is it a strength check? Then use your strength target number.
Right. And there are things that can adjust it, but 9 times out of 10, that's adjustments on your side, not the other side, the DM side.
Typically your adjustments are adding more dice to your dice pool.
Yeah.
Or adding or subtracting dice to the dice pool.
Right. It's not changing your target number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which makes it even easier.
Yeah, exactly.
You have your derived stats that come off of that, which is your endurance, your hope, and your parry. Mm-hmm. Which aren't necessarily... They're kind of stats in their own right. But they're not attributes.
They're point pools.
Correct. Correct.
So your endurance kind of, acts a little bit like your, it doubles as encumbrance and hit points. Kind of.
And stamina. Like, it's all wrapped into one.
Yeah, it's all kind of wrapped into one. It gets used for a lot of things, but basically it is the measure of longevity of your character.
Because your load comes into play with it.
Right. So like I said, it doubles as encumbrance. So, you know, when your key thing is comparing it to your load score.
Right.
And your load will get modified by fatigue, which you'll pick up on the road. So as you get more weary, as you have like your heavy armor and stuff like that, and maybe you've been on the road for a week and you've picked up a few fatigue points, suddenly your whatever 10 endurance is not cutting it anymore. And you either can't take some of that heavy equipment into your next encounter, or you become weary.
Right.
And that starts screwing your dice rolls. So it's for all of you who looked at hit points and said, this doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Why are you as effective at 1 hit point as you are at 500 hit points? This fixes that issue.
Yeah. And we'll get into how this really starts to become a downward spiral. Mm-hmm. Where you can't just keep running. And some of that has to do with just the term weary, but we'll get to that status and what it really can mean.
Then you've got hope. Mm-hmm. Hope's got a real simple mechanic to it, actually. You spend a point of hope, and you get to add +1 dice to whatever roll you're making.
Yeah.
There are some other little things that modify that, but the other thing you have to check is make sure your hope doesn't drop to at or below your current shadow points. Mm-hmm. You'll gain shadow points when basically bad things happen. It's essentially your character's hopelessness.
Yeah.
The amount that they're letting the world get to them, they're turning to the shadow, and they're just realizing that the world really kind of sucks and
and there's really only 3 things that can work into your shadow, and there are ways to get rid of shadow.
Yeah.
But it can very much drain on you.
But if your shadow ever overtakes your hope, you become miserable. And that has an in-game.
That has an in-game status. Mm-hmm. And then parry is just your parry. It's your target number. All attack rolls targeting you
to be hit. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward.
It's your armor class.
You have skills, and skills are pretty standard off of strength, heart, and wits.
Yeah. There's
adjustments.
18 skills. 6 under each attribute, and it actually reminded me a lot of like old White Wolf games where you had like your physical skills, your mental skills, and your social skills.
Yeah,
it's kind of the same thing. Or they're organized under your strength, your heart, and your wits.
Right.
And then it's simple to see on your character sheet. Obviously, this is a strength skill because it's under the strength column.
Right.
And so you use your strength target number for it whenever you're rolling it.
Yep.
And that's it. That's the whole thing.
And you always are going to be rolling. We talk about there's a distinction in dice too, a little bit of the dice mechanic, but you end up really rolling 2 dice. Sometimes...
Well, two types of dice.
Two types of dice. Sometimes you're rolling extra dice.
Yeah, so each one of your skills is going to have a rating 0 through 6. So whenever you're asked to make any sort of a skill check, and this works for weapon proficiencies in combat as well.
Completely.
Are basically just specialized types of skills for the weapons. You pick up a number of 6-sided dice equal to that skill, and then you also pick up a d12, which is called the fate die. Or no, not fate. Feat.
Feat.
I kept mixing that up.
I did it several times myself.
It was called the feat die. And the feat die is kind of like a,
glorified D12.
Maybe a little compared to, like, the wild die in Savage Worlds, but kind of not really.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in thought it is, but in truth it is a D12 where there's 10 numbers on it and 2 symbols.
Yes.
So... And you can play technically with a normal D6 and a D12.
Yeah, you use the 11 and the 12 for it on a regular D12. Yes. Or you can get the specialized dice that they sell.
Right, which is cool. But effectively there's a Gandalf symbol and a Eye of Sauron symbol. So it's like good and bad, effectively.
Yes.
And the D6 on the 6 itself has also an elven symbol on it for like a better effect, a special
like
effect that comes from
sort of thing, yeah.
So all that kind of comes into play. You then, like you were talking about the combat proficiencies, and they're literally skills.
There's
so like
4 of them.
Yeah.
And I love that so much. One of my biggest pet peeves with games is when they break down
Martial
you have a +3 in pistols, but you only have a +1 in submachine guns. Like, okay, you pointed at someone and you pull the trigger. How much different can those two things be?
You get very crunchy. It can get very crunchy.
Here you've got swords, axes, spears, and bows.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. Distinctive features. I like that heading. I like that they called it that. Because I think it's a great way of talking about things that are more role-playing related that are still mechanical. And I think that's great. What was it? You can be inspired. Right? Is that
yes.
And then that adds hope.
Well, no. If you use hope
right.
while you're inspired, you add 2 dice instead of 1.
Yes.
So you get bonuses out of using hope, but you still have to use the hope to do it.
Right. Yeah. So once you have a character, like we were talking about, you then literally in the game mechanics talk about what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing. What is your call to the adventure?
And this is kind of where I say, a really, really soft kind of character class.
Yes.
And
you pick a role.
Character class is in very much the same way. It reminded me a lot of when we did Cyberpunk Red. Where it's like, yeah, this is technically the class that it says on your sheet. It basically just gives you a bonus. Like, a special trick you can do. It doesn't make you any different. It doesn't pigeonhole you into a job. It just says that of the available skills, you also have this cool little knack.
Right. So to say that someone is either a captain, a champion, a messenger, a scholar, a treasure hunter, or a warden.
Yep.
And you'll get a favored skill.
Favored skills, you
get 3 of them.
You roll 2 feat dice and take the better of the 2.
Correct. So it's kind of like an added advantage.
Yeah, it's basically advantage.
And then you have, you get an additional distinctive feature, which I think is great that you get, like, effectively another role-playing element, that is unique. And then your shadow path comes out of this as well.
And the shadow path is interesting. It's kind of a role-playing cue for, as you accrue shadow points, in what way does your character kind of slump off to the shadow? Where do they fracture?
Right. And I feel that that's kind of a calling to humanity.
Yeah.
Or those types of systems, where you have that, not heavy-handed, but a mechanical system that is helping the player remind them of where they're at.
Yes.
That this system is helping you go in that direction. Then they just give you previous experience, points. Cause the idea is that you didn't just step into this world fresh.
Yeah.
So for all those people who are like, yeah, I made my character, I'm a level 1 fighter, what the heck am I doing here? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. This kind of helps remind you that you did other crap.
Yes. So you'll actually start with, an item of superior worth. So basically you get like kind of, I don't know, a free magic item necessarily, but it's like of superior worth. It's a nice sword or a
good
nice
armor.
shield or even just a tool of some sort that might help you along the way. You know, it doesn't have to be a weapon or armor.
Right.
You start your Valor and Wisdom at 1. Valor and Wisdom are kind of like where your experience levels come out of. But it's cool because it affords you 2 different paths of advancement. Valor kind of being the more combative, more physical, more warrior style stuff, whereas Wisdom is the more scholarly, more knowledgeable, more wise pursuit. And so when you advance either of them, you get bonuses. And because you start with both of them at 1, you get a bonus from each one.
One gives you basically a ability, effectively, which is, confidence, which may raise your hope. Confidence raises hope by 2. Or mastery, which gives you an additional 2 skills to be favored in.
Yeah.
So you then have, if you're wisdom, you're basically saying like, okay, what kind of reward do I get for my gear? This is where that extra favorite item can come from, where like, I have a keen weapon. So it's, I get a piercing blow on a 9 or up, right? Which is going to do something more than just damage, or close fitting armor, which gives me a +2 to the result of my protection roll.
That's valuable. That's
right.
Valuable.
So this is where like having that mithril chain makes a little bit of a difference.
Yeah.
But again, one of the things that you were saying about it is that when you have an item of superior worth, it is yours. It is plot immune. I mean, you're not just gonna lose it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really liked is it's like, look, you spent character points on this. This isn't just a trinket. This is part of your character. And so whatever plot contrivance you need to make that thing stick to you, or immediately come back to you if it's ever lost, or whatever, make it happen.
Yeah. And besides that, you're not going to give it up. Yes. It is yours.
You can't give it to somebody else.
It is your signature weapon. It's not like Gimli will never give his axe to one of the elves, and say, here, use this on the door. Like, that's not going to happen.
Right.
It is, and often those weapons are buried with you. Like, that is your personal item. So that's the other thing around it, that of trying to get around like, oh, I got this and now I'm just going to hand it off to Sarah's character because, she needs to work on her other, wits or whatever.
Yeah.
No, that's not how that game works. And we talked a little bit about load. And I think this is, they clearly define the finite level that they want you to consider load, and that is, it is your war gear and your treasure. That's it.
That's it. Like, we know you have a bedroll, we know you have a mess kit. Like,
water skins, yeah.
Everybody does. That doesn't count against your load.
Right. And you have personal trinkets, like things that you need. Rope, tinder, these are understood that you have a few of these extra items on you, right? Yep. But your load is what determines effectively your encumbrance and ties against your endurance.
Yes.
And that's where the cost comes in, because, if you keep loading yourself down with treasure, that is going to cost you. If you keep loading yourself down with war gear, that is going to cost you.
Yep.
It's an investment, and it shows in the end how long you can stay out there in the fray. The next portion of that is building the company.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of those fellowship mechanics come in. I really liked this. It does a lot of subtle little group building activities. So the first one is it's going to be your patron.
Yeah.
So they suggest you take a patron. Patrons can be there are multiple different dramatis personae, powerful characters in the setting and stuff like that. You don't necessarily have to know a lot about them. They kind of give you a little bit about those characters and what their goal might be. You may not even necessarily meet this person. They may even just work through intermediaries.
Correct.
But if you're doing a dungeon delving campaign where you're going to go out and bring back riches, maybe one of the dwarves is super into that. So they're your patron. Cool.
Yeah. And because of that, you get plot hooks. It gives you a purpose. You'll get a bonus to your fellowship rating.
Yep, your fellowship rating is a thing, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah. And you'll get special things you can do.
Like your whole company gets a special ability they can kind of call upon.
Yeah, they can use hope to do something or spend a fellowship point to do something.
Mm-hmm.
You have a safe haven, which I think is a great thing. It is where you are safe. It is your home base, effectively.
Yeah, you're basically your base of operations.
But it isn't necessarily a base of operations that you own, but it is a place that you are comfortably able to return to without question.
Home,
you do call home. And it is the story's home. And I think that's a fantastic thing. And it means that it can shift. It can be other places. So you may finish this adventure somewhere else, we have the initial one be, I don't know, Rivendell, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where your home base steps out from. But then as you continue through the adventure, you decide that you're going to journey to Bree. Mm-hmm. So now, the inn in Bree is you're going to be your new fellowship for the next set of adventures.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Sure.
You're always returning there for your fellowship phase. For your comfort time will be in Bree.
And then speaking of fellowship, you then have a fellowship rating, which we mentioned just a minute ago. And your fellowship rating is a collective pool of points. It starts off at a base of 1 per character in the fellowship, or in the company. But Men of Bree, their special benefit is that they add 1 per Man of Bree to in addition to, basically they count for 2. Mm-hmm. And then your patron may also lend to that. So you may end up in a pool of 6 characters. You may end up with a fellowship rating of 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Depending on, your group composition and your patron. And your fellowship rating is very simple. You just use it during your downtime, when you're resting for the, for the evening or whatever.
During the adventuring phase.
To regain hope.
Yeah.
That's it. Just to regain hope.
There are a few other, I want to say I think there are cultural blessings.
Blessings
that can use some fellowship points, but most of the time they end up using hope.
Yeah, and some patron abilities take fellowship points.
That's the other one, and that can happen during other phases. So you do end up using those fellowship points in different ways, but effectively it's designed to help the group as a whole.
Yeah, and it requires everybody's consent to spend the fellowship points.
Yes.
So there's already a mechanic there where it's asking your group to communicate about the needs of the group.
Right. Right. If you've got somebody who's down, who's injured, and you need to keep moving, you might end up spending quite a bit to try and to increase their hope so that you can get their endurance back.
This is actually the plot of Darkest Dungeon 2.
Yeah. You then have a fellowship focus, which I think is a good thing to talk about because, you've got a patron who's giving you your stuff. You've got a place that's your home base. You've got this pool of great points. What the heck is our focus on this? What are we doing?
Well, no, your fellowship focus is someone else in the group.
Right, which is who you're doing it with.
Right.
That's the bonds that we were talking about.
Yeah, if you look at the movies, Frodo is Samwise's fellowship focus.
Right.
Okay, everything Samwise is doing is about helping Frodo.
Well, I mean, if you follow the diaries from way back in the day, everybody was focused on Mr. Frodo.
Everybody's focused on Mr. Frodo. But it might be a romantic interest. It might be a friendship. It might be an idolization or a familial relationship. They may be your ward.
Yeah.
You're watching out for them, etc. But it's someone else in the fellowship or in the company that you care about more than anybody else in the company.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be some, huge earth-shaking thing.
No.
But it's just these guys are a bunch of mercenaries and I don't really give a crap about them, but Rob knows his way around the sword. I kind of respect that guy.
That's why I'm here.
That's my fellowship focus. Boom.
Right. And the best part about it is it helps figure out who you're focused on, who you as a player should be looking to and making sure of and why. It's that one line that you need to help remind you why you're there.
And it's real simple. Anytime I use a support, I give them 2 dice instead of 1, because I'm throwing an extra effort into them because I like them but more than anybody else. But if anything bad happens to them, I gain a shadow point. They get wounded in combat or, any other number of things. So it really bums me out when bad things happen to my fellowship focus.
Yep. Experience.
So this one's a little, I don't know, controversial is probably way too weighty of a term, but this is one that kind of left me scratching my head just a little bit, is that there's actually two different types of experience points, but they essentially function the exact same.
Kind of, except for adventuring points give a little bit of difference. So you have your skill points. You straight up get 3 skill points at the end of every game.
Yeah.
And then you also get, at the end of, I want to say, at the end of the Fellowship Yule, you also get points based upon your wits.
Yes.
You get additional skill points based upon your wits. Which is just effectively when you hit the holiday.
Yeah.
When Fellowship is in
year-end sort of thing.
You get some extra stuff. And then, your adventure points are 3 additional points. Now, adventure points can translate directly to skill points. You can use them that way. There's no question about that. But they also have a whole mechanic system for creating heirs.
When you want to retire a character and come back as a different character.
Exactly. Yep. And you can pre-invest at that point. And when you hit 10 points of investment, that heir exists, basically, and now is available, and there are things there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, I think it's kind of a cool mechanic that they've pre-thought about what your next character might be.
Yeah, I think Dungeon World had kind of a similar mechanic where it was like at a certain point, like you have to retire your character.
They force you to, yeah.
So then you come back as another level 1 character that was in some way like apprenticed to your other character. So it's cool that there's a continuation of it like that.
Yeah. So we've kind of been throwing this concept back and forth before we get into the mechanics that really there's only, I will say there are 2 phases. There's the adventure phase and the fellowship phase. The adventure phase is the player phase, just like from Mouseguard, where that's where your action is going to be occurring, your scenes.
That's the GM phase in Mouseguard.
Yes, sorry. And it is where you are doing most of your challenges with the storyteller being the person creating the challenges for you and working through those scenes, including journeying, which is its own thing that's part of that. And the way they cut it down to it is basically there are 3 sections to that. There's 3 filters to it, which is basically your, effectively your combat phase. You have a council phase, which is basically when you're meeting with people, and having to navigate a dramatic type of scene almost.
Yeah, almost like a social combat sort of set of rules. I don't know if I would call it social combat necessarily, but it is definitely like the, we need help from some, powerful entity. Let's talk to them.
Let's not immediately draw swords. It doesn't mean it won't be a tense situation.
Right.
And then journeying is its own thing where you're literally moving across hexes on the map.
It's a hex crawl.
It is a hex crawl.
It went absolutely old school, and there's a beautiful map in the back of the book that's got basically Eriador broken down into hexes for you. So you can always tell exactly where you are, what your terrain looks like, how many hexes are from point A to point B.
And there's a whole system for how to move across that so that you're not having to do the minutia of the encounters, but still have events transposed.
It makes it dramatic. It makes everybody in the group involved.
And there's a cost.
Yeah, and there's definitely like the journey has been long and hard and fraught with dangers sort of
and
feel to it.
One of the things that I think became very obvious to me when I was doing it, I was like, oh, okay, so the journey has this and then the fatigue and stuff, and then I immediately saw it. I saw the scene of them in the mountains.
Yep.
And going, we can't do this. We have to turn back. We have to go through. And like, I guess we do because like, we're all really weak.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a very easy scene. Like, any D&D game will be like, yeah, we have survival, we'll just long rest, or I'll use this spell and we'll be comforted and we can go for another 3 days and I have good berries. Like, yeah. Travel is nothing. It's easy. I don't even need airships. Whatever.
It's barely mentioned in the player's handbook, if at all. And,
and in this case, it is quintessentially part of the journey. Like, you have to figure this shit out. So that's where that's at, is that your encounters don't leave your hex. You leave that hex, it costs a journey. It is a journey. That is what is cool about that. I love that. But the fellowship phase is the player phase. That is where you're rest recuperating, you're practicing your skills, you're doing stuff from nobles. maybe you're at a special event, maybe it's a special time of year, or it's the year end, the Yule, if you will. And there's some things that go along with that, but in essence, it's where you get to say what you're doing during your downtime.
It's the scene in the movies where everybody meets back up in Rivendell, and Frodo and Bilbo get to talk to each other for the first time in a while.
Yeah.
And Liv Tyler's character, I forgot her name, is really happy to see Aragorn back, and
Aragorn,
they have the Council of Elrond there.
The swords get crafted and items get given and traded. People get healed. Scars form from wounds, and you're able to just, become a little more whole. Hope can sometimes be can rebirth there a little bit.
Yeah, the fellowship phase is essentially where you're in a safe haven and you get to do all the storytelling that would take place there when you're not getting attacked by orcs.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the mechanics. When I say a little, there's going to be a lot. It's going to sound heavy. It's going to sound heavy, but it's not.
Yeah. So this was my thing with reading through this, is that there are few mechanics. We pretty much went over them earlier.
Yeah,
there are very few mechanics. There is a lot of rules. Every system works a little bit differently than the last, and they have all very fleshed out rules for how the system works. Very simple mechanics for adjudicating them all.
Yeah.
It's always just roll the appropriate skill versus your attribute's target number.
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
But holy cow, there are a lot of rules.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I almost feel like it needed to go through this level of explanation to stop you thinking that this is D&D. But at the same time, to basically just take care of everything in a simple way.
Yeah.
Like, if it's not that important, roll against the TN. Mm-hmm. That's it. Simple as that. And the game does make it very clear, especially when it's talking about trivial things, don't roll.
Yeah.
Just don't roll.
Okay, once again, to kind of concisely go over the dice mechanics. Every skill, including weapon proficiencies, is rated 0 to 6. Mm-hmm. You're going to take that many 6-sided dice and a d12. Mm-hmm. You're going to roll them all, and you're going to add all of the numbers together.
Yep.
Okay. Any 6s that come up on your d6, or if you're using the specialized dice, it's going to have that elven rune for success on there. Mm-hmm. Those are kind of like raises in other games.
Yeah.
They're little extra bonuses you get on top of there. There's certain things that will trigger off of them in like cultural blessings and whatnot. Yep. You can spend them for extra advantages. There's a generic list of advantages you can kind of get out of things, of doing things either like quickly or extra quiet or, helping another person while you're at it to erase one of their failures, things like that. And then along with that, you've got your fate die, or your did it again. Feat die, which is that D12. 1 through 10, you add that in just like normal.
Yep.
But there's also 11 and 12 are on the special die, the Eye of Sauron, and Gandalf's Rune, and I forgot what the name for Gandalf's Rune is.
Yeah, I mean, just call it Gandalf's Rune.
Gandalf's Rune. And basically, if you roll the Gandalf Rune, it's an automatic success. Doesn't matter what came out on the dice. You succeed.
Yep.
If it is the Eye of Sauron, that feat die counts as 0.
Correct. You add nothing.
Now, there are sometimes other effects where if the Eye of Sauron comes up or the Gandalf Rune comes up, blah blah blah, but it will specify that in the rule.
Yep.
Match or beat your target number.
Yeah.
And that's it. And your target number, like I said, is 20 minus your attribute.
Right. And the other thing that could come into this is where you have the elven runes, the 6. When you roll those, depending on how many of those you get, you can get these special things that can come out of it. So if I have 1, great, it was a nice event. But if I have 2, I can actually spend that on this list of things, and I can be like, and I learned something new. Some piece of information that was important for the plot. Or I get I might be able to do it faster, or I might be able to do it quietly, or I might be able to remove a success or add, like you were saying, from somebody else if it's a group of things. The things that can work against those rolls, on the other hand, are things like your status effects that are on you, and or favored or ill-favored rolls, and that's basically where you take it's advantage or disadvantage.
It's advantage or disadvantage for the feat die.
But realistically, if I am weary, and really getting to weary is not as hard as you think it is.
No, it isn't.
If I'm loaded down with gear, right? I've got my war gear. Maybe I just got a couple of like some treasure.
Fatigued from the road,
right? And
then you get in a fight,
right? So now I'm in a fight. I am below my endurance is now just below my load where I'm at on that. I am weary. Weary basically says 1, 2, or 3 on those 6-sided dice. Any of those 6-sided dice
counts as 0.
Is nothing.
Yep.
I do not get to add to those.
You have to roll a 4, 5, or 6 to do anything.
Now you can still have an instant success. That hasn't gone away. The 12 still works, but it does make it infinitely harder to try and get your target number.
Yep.
And things happen when you can't do that. Weary has a few other effects that lean into it, but I think that's the one that always sticks in my mind is like, you're weary. That's bad.
That's bad.
Yeah. And you might start thinking about dropping stuff to be able to get out of situations.
There are whole ass predators in this world, like that are pursuit predators that just wait to pick off the weary ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And the game basically forces you to return because of that. Because as you build up your fellowship, as your fellowship gets higher, because of events and things that you do during your adventure, darkness watches.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, it comes for you. And then it gets real bad. And that's where you might get attacked by things, or greed starts slipping in. Those dark paths start triggering. And it's harder to say no to things.
Speaking of the shadow coming for you,
yes.
Let's talk about combat.
Yes.
Combat I was really impressed with in this game.
It is different.
It is all about positioning. Literally. No, this system does not use grids or concrete distances other than ranged or melee.
This is Darkest Dungeon in that sense, right? Your position in the line makes a huge difference.
Yeah, there's basically 3-4 positions in the group. Yeah, it's basically like Darkest Dungeon.
Or or what you used to love, Final Fantasy Tactics. Your position.
No, believe it or not, Tactics actually plays a lot like 5th edition D&D.
Oh, I guess suppose so. I just keep seeing the distance in the lines and where you can be.
No, I'll tell you what it really reminded me of, actually, was Fate.
Oh, okay.
Fate has zones instead of concrete distances and stuff like that. It's just like, are you closer to this dude or are you closer to this dude?
Yep. So anyway,
so basically you've got combat is very abstract in how it plays out, but because of that, it plays out very heroically.
Exceptionally.
So you've got what's called an opening volley, where basically you see each other across the way, and people start launching arrows and throwing axes or whatever at each other.
Right.
Whatever you got on hand.
Right.
There's no initiative. Heroes always go first.
Yep.
That's
love
it.
that.
Heroes win initiative.
Even
Boom.
in ambushes. It's a little different for ambushes. Basically, you're at a disadvantage.
You basically just need to make sure you're like, who sees the ambush coming, and if you do, you still go first.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's also some disadvantage rules in there, but that's it. Like, literally that's it.
Yeah, ambushes are about the only thing to circumvent this. So you have an opening volley, and that's basically, as you're charging at each other, there will be ranged attacks that happen.
Right.
Heroes go first, then adversaries. And then you move into close quarters. So once you're in close quarter combat, you have 4 stances you can take. And see, for me, I don't know, they didn't suggest this in the book, but like what I would do is just lay out a piece of paper, and then you've got 3 stances in the front and then 1 in the back, because it's literally the rearward stance where you're staying back and launching arrows like Legolas, right?
Yeah.
I would just lay out a piece of paper with those stances labeled on it and just have people just drop a miniature on there for, and they do kind of suggest you, like, use minis, but don't use, like, a grid. Like, just use them to indicate who's fighting who.
Right.
So you can keep track of that.
Yep.
Plus minis are fun.
Minis are fun.
So your forward stance, is basically you're charging headlong into battle.
Right.
Open stance, which is kind of your mid ground, and your defensive stance, which is basically you're focusing more on defending than attacking. Effectively, these are the same from the standpoint of if I just want to hit somebody, I can be in any of these stances.
Correct.
I'm still going to be in close combat. What they do, however, though, is they allow for a special action to be taken when in that stance. If you're in forward, you can use the Intimidate Foe action, which drops a bunch of debuffs on them for, takes dice out of their pools.
Right.
If you're in the open stance, you can Rally Comrades, which gives a bunch of dice to your allies to attack their foes.
Right.
And then if you're in the defensive stance, you've got Protect Companion, which I forget the exact mechanic, but I think it adds to their parry.
Adds to protection.
Adds to their protection.
Their protection roll, yeah.
And then your rearward stance is the only one you can use range weapons from. And you've got the special action of Prepare Shot, which is basically aim. You don't fire this turn to add a bunch of dice to your next turn.
Right.
And then, like I said, it's basically like heroes go first. Adversaries will pair off 1-to-1 until everyone has an opponent. They can leave some back in their own rearward stance. They do the same thing. Or they just start doubling up on heroes at that point if there's more adversaries than heroes. And then you just you make rolls. So if I'm using a sword, I'm just going to roll my sword skill just like any other skill. And I'm going to compare that to my strength target number. And I'm going to see if I hit.
And if you hit, you either do the straight endurance effectively damage, or if you're if you have a special, if it's a special weapon and it's got like the ability where you can do a piercing hit or a heavy blow or something like that, that effect it goes as well.
Yes. So just like any other roll, we're going to be rolling the feat die along with it, right? Now, if that feat die comes up as a 10. Or the Eye of Sauron, it becomes a piercing blow, which is essentially your critical hit. And this is where, your, wounds are basically going to come in. Okay, so you're doing endurance damage to people, and that's going to whittle them down, and that's definitely bad. Like, you don't ever want your endurance to hit 0. But, like, a piercing blow is going to cause them to become wounded. And that's just a status effect. And we'll talk about that one in a little bit when we're getting there.
Yeah, and a question came up in comment when I was just writing back to Nox asked, does this mean every battle kind of plays out the same? And the answer is, yeah.
Yes and no. Like, all the mechanics are more or less the same, but, like, your opponents are going to have different abilities. Like, you were looking at, like, the bestiary, where you were looking at, like, wolves versus bandits versus
undead.
Versus undead and stuff like that. And they all act in very different ways that change. Like, yeah, if you're just fighting dudes versus dudes, yeah, okay, yeah. You just kind of line up in close combat stances and you swing at each other, sure.
Yeah. Whereas, like, the wolves literally can leap to rearward.
Yeah, like, your archer is not safe from wolves.
Correct. Undead can cause dread, which basically makes everyone unable to spend hope. So, yes, the mechanical movement of combat is the same. No different than D&D's mechanical combat is effectively the same.
Yeah.
Every single set. I mean, you could say that it changes when you get into layers and you have layer mechanics that add on to that, or you're fighting a boss and a boss has legendary moves. Those don't come in. And for that reason alone, and I'm flat out going to say this, it makes this easier and faster. Yeah. Because everybody knows what's going on at all times.
Exactly. And the thing too you have to keep in mind is that this also allows less combative characters to still be effective. Because things like your Intimidate and your Rally Comrades are going to be they're going to be social checks, essentially. You know, you're not going to rally your comrade with your sword skill. You're going to rally your comrade with, like, I forgot what the name of the skill is, but essentially a persuade skill, you know, or I think it's awe. Yeah. Awe, I think, is the name of the skill. And so someone with a high awe is going to, you know, they're not going to want to go in swinging. They're going to want to rally their comrades and add dice to the ones who are going in swinging.
Right.
You know, but that still puts them in, tactically, in the open stance, which puts them in melee combat. So,
and one of the things that I'm going to point out is that Nox added in was I was thinking about this in a tactical manner.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right. So one of the other things that I'm going to add to this is remember that your endurance is being reduced. So if unlike D&D, if we put our quote-unquote tank in the front, so I'm always putting my dwarf and his full plate mail in the front, his endurance is going down every single session. He doesn't get to get that back, or every single encounter. Yeah. He doesn't get that back. He is draining just as much as we are on the journey. So,
nobody's popping health potions. There's no cleric.
Correct. So at some point, he is going to be weak and not able to take that forward stance.
And also keep in mind that this exact same fight plays out far differently on day 10 of a journey than day 2 of a journey.
Exactly. The scene, I'm trying to think of the scene in the movie, in one of the movies where the hobbits jump with their knives on something.
Uh-huh.
Oh no, it was a Boromir scene. Where they were trying to save and help Boromir.
Yeah.
And they literally jumped from where they were in rearward, flinging stones into the fray because they had to.
You mean they moved from a rearward stance into a defensive stance and used the defend companion action?
You could say that they did that.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? So, you can see that there are always going to be moments when you need to shift tactically. And that happens. Everyone has a point to move through things. And it's not even because of who you are class-wise or what skills you have. It literally depends on how are things going.
Yeah. How's your buddy? How are you?
Yeah. Sometimes the backup character who's a farmer has to go save his friend because he's going to get some bad points if he doesn't.
Yeah. All right. So, basically combat continues just like that. We talked a little bit about how endurance is going to drop. And that's going to cause you to become weary if your load ever becomes higher than your endurance. That can happen because your load increased, but it can also happen, more usually, because your endurance dropped.
Yeah.
And
fatigue.
So you can change that in one of two ways.
Right.
You can shed equipment.
Yeah.
Like if I just need 1 point of endurance to not become weary anymore, I can just take my helmet off.
Yeah.
That's a point of load.
Right.
I drop my helmet.
Yeah.
Now I'm missing the protection from it now.
But I'm not weary anymore.
But that's a choice I made.
Right.
It's a tactical choice I made.
Right. There somebody had stated that it made the question of, in the opening volley, can I throw my shield at them to reduce my endurance? And they were like,
that's valid.
That's heckin' valid, ooh woo.
That's super heckin' valid, ooh woo. Yes.
You'll get it back, don't worry.
Alright, so then you've got wounds. And wounds, so endurance loss sucks, but also, piercing wounds, or piercing hits.
Oh, I want to step one back.
Oh, yeah,
I just want to step back to endurance. Fatigue comes from the road, adds to your load. It's like a temporary
load points.
It's phantom load points. So basically, every time, regardless, maybe you're not adventuring for gold. You're just going to get to a place. And every step along that way, your load is slowly getting heavier.
Uh-huh.
So your endurance may not be dropping. You may be doing really well at stabilizing that, but eventually...
you're still creeping up on it, yeah.
A long journey is still a long journey.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry, continue with wounds. I think that was good.
So anyways, you get a piercing blow, or your endurance, I believe, hits 0.
Yes, when you hit 0, you are unconscious.
Right. And so wounded is a status effect.
Correct.
This is kind of like hit points better than hit points. You know? You do have that degradation in effectiveness as your endurance goes down, and then when you hit 0 or you take that piercing blow, that's when you get that real heavy effect from it.
Right.
So you're going to roll the fate die. Or, did it again. Feet die.
Feet.
When you get wounded.
Yes.
If it is the Gandalf rune, you're fine. It's superficial. I mean, you're still wounded, but you'll have it, you'll walk it off in an hour.
Yeah.
You get the wind knocked out of you. It sucks, but you'll heal. If it is a 1 to 10, that is how many days it will take you to recover from that wound.
Yeah. How bad it is.
And then, if it is the Eye of Sauron, It's essentially a crit.
Yeah.
And you are dying.
And you are at 0 endurance.
0 endurance immediately, and you need medical attention within 1 hour or you die.
Right.
Period.
It's straightforward.
Yep.
So, yeah. And there's a lot of things that can do piercing blows easily.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some creatures, basically, it's on a 9 up. They do a piercing blow.
Yeah.
That's not hard. Remember, you're rolling a d12.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
And then if you take another wound while you're wounded, that's essentially the same as Eye of Sauron. You immediately go to
a dying state.
So you basically have 2 wounds you can take.
Right.
That's it.
Yep.
And the second wound is the one that kills you.
Correct. Now, if you're just incapacitated, and you will recover at the end of, I think it's 1 day, you will return back with 1 endurance. Mm-hmm. You don't, like if you do a short rest, it doesn't count, but a long rest will give you 1 endurance, and short rest will give you nothing on a wound. A long rest will give you back to 1 endurance.
Yes.
And you're not on your feet, really, because again, you're weary instantaneously, because there ain't nothing that's gonna give you a load of 0.
Yeah.
You know?
Especially when you figure in fatigue.
Correct.
Yep.
So, yeah, it is not great, but I mean,
but
that's how it feels. Like
you can limp.
And so I love doing the comparison. Like, imagine if when you hit half of your hit points, or half of your strength, like your strength score times, I don't know, times 1 or times 2. Once you reach that or below in hit points, you are now weary. Half of your dice don't count. Like,
right.
Oh, so 0 through 10 on a D20 does not count.
Yep.
Like, uh-oh.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't care what special abilities you have, it just doesn't work.
You start reassessing your priorities real quick at that point.
Yeah.
So alright, we talked a little bit, we already talked about equipment. I'm gonna skip that actually, I think.
Valor is the only thing that gets you additional stuff. And one of the things that was unique about Valor, as taking more Valor, is that it also has kind of a social impact.
Yeah, you said, like, people start taking notice, especially the Shadow, as you become more valorous.
Yeah, and one of the big things about that is that not only do they take notice, but other people do. So, like, some people will avoid you because you're bringing war. Like, that's what you look like. Yeah. You're gonna bring it to them. Other people will be like, you need to defend us. Come save us. Mm-hmm. You're the only one who can.
Yep.
So, the greedy people will look to you. So it's interesting to see the kind of social dynamics that come off of choosing to be valorous or being witful.
Yeah.
And what that
wise.
Wise, yes. Yeah. So, journeying.
Alright, so journeying. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit. It's an old school hex crawl.
Yeah.
But it's really good.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely a thing. Like, this is a necessary part of the journey.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was this mechanic that really had me saying, like, this does D&D better than D&D does D&D, because, in a lot of ways, like, there's a lot of stuff in, like, the Dungeon Master Guide, I guess. Yeah. For overland travel and stuff like that, but I always felt like the Dungeon Master Guide was, like, suggestions. And not really like, these are core mechanics that you play with.
Do you really need a second? You don't need a second book to play this game.
You don't need a second book to play this game. Yeah. Exactly.
But I like it. I think you could extract it. I think you could pull that out of this game and really be able to use it in certain other systems.
It would take a little work because some of the mechanics are inextricably tied to how this game works.
I get that, but it's a neat concept.
But it is a neat concept. Yeah. But basically, like I said, you've got in the book a convenient hex map of Eriador.
Yeah.
So you're able to basically find where they are, where they're going, et cetera, et cetera. There are roles that you're going to have everybody take in the journeying group. You're going to have a guide, a scout, a lookout.
Because you took that at the beginning.
No,
sorry. That's the roles during the journey. You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, these are your journey roles. You can only have one guide,
right?
But you can have multiples of the others. But everybody, you have to have at least one of everything,
right?
And then, basically, roles are made by different members using different skills to see how long the next leg of the journey takes, and if any events happen along the way. So, it might be, say, 5 hexes to the next thing. Okay. We could go through, take a shortcut and maybe we'll cut 4 hexes off of it, but one of those is like dangerous.
Yeah.
A dangerous area. So we're going to have, like, maybe our scout is going to make some sort of a check, and it gives the actual specific skill.
Yeah, there's mechanics.
I don't have it sitting in front of me, but the roll dictates what skill they're using. So you can choose to put your best, spy basically in your scout. You can put your best set of eyes in your lookout,
right?
Etc. And then they make a skill roll.
Yep.
And depending on how that comes out, there is rules for any modifiers to the length of time that's going to take, and then things that happen along the way. And half of them are good, and half of them are bad, depending on how the feat die comes up.
Yep.
So if the feat die comes up really high, or like the Gandalf rune, Gandalf rune is like, it's open sailing, you actually make better time than you thought.
Yep.
Or something wondrous happens.
There's some wondrous events that can occur.
If you roll really high, maybe you'll meet friends or traders or something like that.
Arwen meeting them at the river and stopping the wraiths.
A shortcut, things like that happen. But the lower you roll on that feat die, you start getting like in fights or, bad things or bad weather or,
causes more fatigue.
More fatigue because there were obstacles you didn't account for, things like that.
Yeah.
And that result also tells you how much fatigue you take for that step.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And if we didn't make really good time and skip a couple hexes during that day, now it's the next day. Now there's a new roll.
Mm-hmm.
And if you keep rolling low, that 10-day journey turns into a 2-week journey, and that fatigue starts stacking up, and it can get really arduous.
Mm-hmm. You can also not make it back from journeys.
Yeah.
Like, what was it? It wasn't a TPK, but like people said that all their players were down to 1 or 2 endurance and were fatigued by the time they made it back. They dragged themselves back.
I believe it.
Like they went out, didn't make it to the first place they needed to go because they decided to go too far, and had to fatigue their way back and basically do their fellowship of like, we stink at this job. Like maybe
but that's an adventure.
Yep.
You had an adventure. It was great, and it all happened during the journey. So anyways, then you're gonna
get back. Yeah.
You're gonna make it back. You're gonna go out. You're gonna have your adventure. You're gonna have your journeys. Your maybe your fights. Your whatever. You come back to your safe haven, whatever safe haven. Then maybe the one you left from. Maybe a different one you journeyed to.
Yeah.
And we go into the fellowship turn. Yep. For any of you who play Mouse Guard or listen to our Mouse Guard System Spotlight, this is the player turn.
Yep.
Okay. The GM at this point is not going to throw anything else at you. Yep. He's not going to say, like, suddenly orcs attack or anything like that.
Nope.
You are safe. You are in control of the story at this point.
Mm-hmm.
This is the place where you can role-play amongst yourselves. You can role-play with NPCs. Try to advance your own plot. And
work on your air.
Yeah, work on your air. This is also where you're going to spend skill points and adventure points.
Yep.
So basically, it's unlike Dungeons and Dragons where, like, your level up can happen at any time when you're out on the road. Your level ups only ever happen during your fellowship time.
Yeah, when you get back.
Yeah. When you have time to rest and reflect and really truly grow from your experience when you don't have the stress of the road pressing down upon you.
Right.
And it's pretty simple. There's not really a lot of mechanics for it. It's basically just you're at home, you can role play, there's a handful of things they suggest you do, and you can spend your points.
Yep. Alright. We did a lot.
That's a lot.
But it was good.
We're not as overtime as I thought we were going to be, but we are very overtime.
Well, it's one book of like 200 and some pages.
Yeah, and we are glossing the hell over the system.
But I don't think we are. I think we did a good job of explaining it.
Yeah,
I think if we tried to do the same level on a couple other systems, we felt like we were glossing them.
Yeah.
Huge sections of rules we never got into about ship movement in some things. And like when we talk about D&D, there are whole sections of rules that we just don't have time to discuss.
Yeah, true.
But this, the only thing that we really didn't talk about was magic. And the easy thing to say is, when you use magic, it eats into darkness. That's pretty much it. That's the way it works, for lack of a better term. Magic is is a exceptionally powerful and dangerous thing. Just remember that. Yes, exactly.
Knocks in the box says they're giving them a taste, and people can now go find the main course. Yes. This is the
lunch. We gave you the lunch portion.
This is the free samples you get at the grocery store.
I don't think this is the free samples. I think we gave a lunch portion, honestly, on this one.
That's fair.
Some of the games we've definitely done lunchable versions.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to ask you, what do you think the One Ring does well?
Does D&D better than D&D does D&D.
I agree.
You've got, it truly simulates the life of an adventurer. You leave the safe haven, you go out on a mission sponsored by a powerful patron with your companions, you face struggles on the road while you try to keep your endurance and high and hope in your hearts. You face awful life-threatening perils that will test your teamwork and your steel. And when you return home, you rest and you reflect on the journey taught to you.
100%.
It is the full narrative hero's journey.
Yep. I agree.
And honestly, if like I said, it's just better than any other simulation of this particular fantasy loop that I've ever seen.
I agree. I think they did an incredible job on refining it. I haven't physically played it. I've seen a play of it.
Right.
But I am happy to look at it and go, this is well done.
Yes.
Now, I will agree that it's mechanics light, only by saying, in comparison to other things of the fantasy genre that include magic, combat, travel, this is light.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yep.
But does it well and makes the character sheets easy to read.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you understand the mechanics and you look at the character sheet, you'd almost think, like, doesn't this need to have some more stuff on it? And the answer is no.
No,
it doesn't.
Because it's all based off of the little bit that they give you right there.
Right.
Yeah.
This is to Lord of the Rings and fantasy, in my mind, at a tactical level, just like 7th Sea. I feel the heroicism and the tragedy that can come from this.
Yeah.
And I feel it's stronger than 7th Sea. 7th Sea is exceptionally heroic. There's very little tragedy in 7th Sea. Mm-hmm. This feels like it has all of that.
Yeah.
It feels like darkness is at the edge of everything, and you are slogging to get to it.
It feels like darkness is at the edge of everything, but you are powerful enough to face it.
With your friends.
With your friends at your side and hope in your heart.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So it brings that Lord of the Rings feeling. I think this does honor to J.R.R. I really think it does. I think it does. Even without talking about the setting, it does honor to it. But it's not intrusive. You don't have to know. Again, we could cover up the fact that this is the One Ring, and it's still an amazing fantasy.
Yeah, you could play, hey, we're playing generic low magic fantasy. And I'll be like, sure. Cool, I'm in.
Yeah.
This sounds great.
In fact, you don't even have to have magic in this. Like, you could play with characters that had no magic. You get a bunch of, Frodos running around, if you will.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's fantastic. You commented on the book.
Book is beautiful.
Yeah.
Book is absolutely beautiful. Well put together. There's beautiful artwork, beautiful maps. Like I said, I think it won awards for the artwork is what we read earlier.
It deserves it.
And we're looking at 235 pages plus the index.
Yeah.
Character sheet at the end.
Yeah.
Comes with also there's a ribbon for a bookmark,
which is fantastic. Always should be included and everything. It's got a nice cover. Even the light silhouetting on the cover. The back of it, like they did a nice job on the way they printed these books. Any print person would look at this and say, "Nicely done."
Yes,
nicely done. It's just, and it's spaced well. You can read it well. Like from a dyslexic point of view, I can read it well both in the PDF and in the book, and I see very little variation between the two.
Yeah,
they did a great job on that.
All right, so where does it fall short for you?
I wouldn't say that it's at the same level of D&D, of bouncing around looking for rules, but that's still very present.
Yeah.
Where
there's definitely a lot of cross-referencing you and I were doing when we were trying to put this together.
Yeah, it was nice to have the PDF to be able to do the search, to be able to look through, like, ooh, I remember this. Where was this? And a lot of times it was like, oh, it was back at the beginning. Like, they painted this right at the beginning, and I'd forgotten at this point.
Yeah.
So I think that was good that's there, but it still feels like you're bouncing around in some ways. Like they'll reference something once and then assume that you have that knowledge as you roll forward.
Yeah, and then they'll just make casual reference to it later, and you're like, I heard that word before?
But I will say...
It's got a good index to it, at least. So
it's got a good index, but also they're very, very good about using power words. Weary,
buzzwords.
fatigue,
so many buzzwords.
Hope. Like, they slam you with these words to make sure you understand that these are the components of the game.
But at the same time, though, I actually put that down as a detractor for me.
Okay.
If only because, and maybe this is just me.
Okay.
But I get lost in similar sounding buzzwords.
Yeah.
Hope, virtue, wisdom, valor. Those all sound great, but kind of like in the back of my head, I'm going, like, those all sound the same.
Yeah, like valor and virtue.
Like,
right.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
It got a little bit blurred for me as I was trying to learn this. I'm sure in the course of gameplay you'll pick it up.
Yeah.
And just trying to learn it over the course of the weekend was,
we did power this in 72 hours effectively.
It was a little overwhelming for me. So it can get a little word salad with all the different, power words they're using, but it's cool though. Like you said, it does lend to itself to the feel.
Yeah, I mean it's iterative in that sense that you are also always adding on to the rule set, and you were talking about this. I think that sometimes feels a little complex.
Mm-hmm.
The experience points being that they added adventure points.
There's two different types of experience points. One can be used for everything. One can just be used for very specific stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it was necessary, but it's a minor gripe.
I think it's a minor gripe only because adventure points basically convert and they're only good for one thing. So it was kind of saying, hey, we know you guys wanted this thing where you could add extra people, but we don't want you to just be able to dump 10 points instantaneously into your air. So it's doled out differently.
Yeah.
And you get definitely more skill points. Without a doubt, you get more skill points. So that your character advances.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have this option set to the side.
Yes.
That's there and available for you. And it's also handled differently for healing. Because adventure points can be used to do other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other part that they wanted was they didn't want you just immediately removing your scars and converting everything to just minor wounds.
Right.
So
there's one thing I didn't put here on the list. I think I put it earlier up during the journey section, but the only problem I've got with the journey rules, it's cool that they're old school hex crawls, but like step 1 is the storyteller will draw the map for you on this special journey sheet, and it's like, man, I'm an artist by trade, and I don't even like that.
Yeah, it was painful for me to read because I was like,
I watch you, I had to like give you a pep talk about using dungeon draft.
Yeah, but I would say like when you first were like, oh, Incarnate's easy, just and I'm like, yeah, I could never do that. Like my brain just doesn't work in the same artistic format.
Right.
So it was a struggle for me. So yeah, I could see that being a struggle for some storytellers where they might grab pre-generated maps for the journeys.
And
that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
If you can't, make your own
store-bought's just fine.
Store-bought's just fine.
And there's plenty out there. I assure you there are plenty.
Yeah.
So we got a couple Discord questions before we roll.
Yeah.
So number 1, Veteran asked, when running games based on media, what do you feel is more important? Staying true to the source material or making sure the system plays smoothly?
Absolutely making sure the system plays smoothly.
Yep.
100%. Source material is 100% negotiable, especially if you're playing in any established world.
Mm-hmm.
I think the very first thing you should do is put out the caveat as the storyteller that this is my version of this world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what lore you thought you had coming in here. If I contradict it, mine's canon.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Especially ones where it is grossly huge. Like one of my biggest pet peeves is reading GMs who are running Marvel Universe stuff and people shitting on them.
Yeah.
For making a decision because they had slightly different knowledge.
Technically in Ultimate Avengers, issue 204, that says that could never happen.
Yeah.
I don't care. I haven't read Ultimate Avengers 204, and I frankly wouldn't care even if I had.
Right.
This is what's going on in my world.
deal with it.
Deal with it. Yeah.
I'm happy to see that What If is a thing that's been pushed around a lot more to help with that. But What If doesn't exist in Forgotten Realms, and there's still people who crap all over people in Forgotten Realms.
Yeah. And like, you and I had talked a little bit about, like, I offhandedly mentioned, I'm like, it would be great if somebody else ran a Tamriel game. I would love to be able to play in Tamriel instead of running it, you know?
Right.
And your immediate reaction was like, I could never do that. You know so much more about the world than I do. And I'm like, yeah, but, like, come on.
Yeah.
You know, you'd run your version of Tamriel.
Yeah.
And I'd play in it.
I would still think there would, again, just like always, there'd be points where you'd be like, alright, and your brain would roll for a half a second, and then I'd move on.
I'd readjust.
Yeah.
Cool. Your understanding of how Shia Gorath interacts with Tamriel is different than mine. Okay, I've recalculated. Let's go.
Let's keep going with this.
Yeah. He's got it, Madness. I can allow for this. Let's go.
That's right. Exactly. So yeah, I agree. And the other thing is I think your players will help you with the source material.
Yeah.
In a role-playing sense.
Yeah, look, be collaborative about it, communicate with your players, find out what sort of stories they're trying to tell and what stories they're looking for from you, and help them tell those stories.
Yeah.
You know?
Likewise.
And if you have to step on some canon to get there, do it.
Likewise, this game, said it at the beginning, forget about what you think your character knows. Mm-hmm. That's one of my biggest pet peeves is when people ask like, oh my god, what do I see? And they're like, well, you see this thing burrowing out of the wall. Oh my god, it's a bugbear. Your character you've never even left your village. How do you even know what a bugbear is?
Yeah, exactly. We need fire to kill it, or acid.
Exactly, sorry. Like, I'm sorry. You've gone too far, stop it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So, he asks, is there any tips on how to balance these competing priorities?
They don't compete.
I don't think they compete.
They don't compete. Yeah. Making sure your game is smooth and fun for everybody, it trumps sticking true to the source material every single time.
Yeah. Movies show this well. Don't make a crappy movie. Yeah. Even if you've got a previous source material.
Yep.
Don't make a crappy movie. Yep. If it's a crappy movie, no one's gonna like it no matter how true you are.
The source material for anything, be it like, reading Forgotten Realms or Tamriel or Lord of the Rings, is there to inform your game, but not dictate it.
Correct. Yep.
That's all.
That's it. Simple as that. Go ahead.
Nevim asks, how to handle the different knowledge level around the table. Some people may have precise knowledge of history, the setting, and others have just seen the movies. I think we kind of addressed this one.
Again, like I said, is like, forget what you know.
Forget what you know.
Yeah.
Straight out of the gate, forget what you know.
Yeah.
And like I said, the other thing too is, like I said, my version's canon if I'm storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sure, it may say in the Silmarillion or whatever, that this can't happen. It might have happened differently in the Two Towers. Don't care. This is my story.
This is the way it's going.
This is my version of Eriador.
Yeah. And I always have felt that you always have that choice, but I can understand where you question it.
Now, one thing I will say is, if it is important to you, like, I do try to run, like, my Tamriel game very lore-friendly, I want, mostly because, it's a test for me to, see how well I know my own lore, and how well I can piece a cohesive story set in Tamriel together. But also, it's a courtesy to you guys if you do any research on your own.
Right.
If you go to UESP or watch some YouTube videos, I want what you see to jive with what I've presented.
Correct. Correct.
So, if someone is more knowledgeable in the history and lore and stuff like that, don't be afraid to tap them as a resource.
Ask them a question to make sure you get it right.
Speak in vagaries. Ask them for their resources. Ask them for opinions on things. You don't have to reveal your plot to them, but tap them as a resource.
Yeah, and do it beforehand. Talk about that in your session 0.
Look,
make sure.
Lore nerds love going off on hour-long tangents, so yeah. Ask them questions. They'll thank you for it.
All right, so our next week's topic, we're back to regular show. We're going to be talking about controlled substances at the table.
Because it's going to be 420.
Woo, woo, woo. Yeah.
All right.
So, I'm sorry, my brain just tripped on that one. All right. So you can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave, on Instagram at @ST_conclave, on MixLR, you can find it at mixlr.com, storyteller.conclave every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. You can also find our link to our Discord on our Twitter or on our website at storytellerconclave.com. Please come join the conversation.
I want to give a big thank you to our named Patreon members, Knox in the Box, Sam, Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Vedran, Hulavu. Thank you for month after month providing your assistance to keeping the show going, and we love you very much, as well as our other Patreons. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. The intro music was Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music you're hearing now is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Mid-Air Machine. Find that up on freemusicarchive.org.
We'd like to thank our families, Vicky and Sean, who help us do this show and remind us every week that it's worth it. And you, our friends, our family who have stayed with us for our games and helped us craft all of the great stories that we do. And finally, you, our listeners, we love you so much.
We love you all.
Good night.
Good night.